All right, so thank you very much, and thank you, Carla, and thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be here to talk about some of the out-of-the-box things that I do. I'm assuming that I don't have to explain the National Academies in this audience, although I do have people come up to me and say, no, you don't have to explain it, but thank you so much for that amazing grant. And then I know you think I work for the National Science Foundation. I just say you're welcome. But I don't. I work for the National Academy of Sciences. And we have members in the room and committee members because I recognize you. So I'm going to skip that part of it and move right on. And this did work a minute ago. So my title of my talk is Beyond Journals. And it was something that Carla had recommended because that's kind of the way that the science community often feels like we communicate with people. Most people are not just general, average, everyday people reading science journals. Neither are they reading the reports of the National Academies. I'm proud of every single one of them and spent my career at the Academies promoting many of them, but most of them are not being read, though they are free to read and download online, a little bit of advertising. Most people are not reading those either. And the death of science journalism is something that we bemoan all the time, that we're not even able to read those kinds of science stories that we used to love to see in our national newspapers. Many of those are now gone. And let's face it, science itself has a bit of an image problem. When we think about who a scientist is and what it means when you say the word science, I think that a lot of people, when you say it to young people, science, well, science is boring. As Rita alluded to, it's not always the kind of thing we want people to say. Or science is hard. I think we remember some of those Barbie dolls, math is hard. And we don't really like hearing these things, but this is the reputation that science has. And the other reputation, and Judy Salerno and I were just talking about this, well, it's a little bit stale, pale, and male sometimes. And so do you really want to be this? I'm not really sure. Maybe if you are stale and pale and male, or you look like this, because if you Google science, this is a lot of times what you get. Again, this is not so aspirational or inspirational when you think about communicating science. And then if you look at the social science literature, and Susan Fiske, who is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, has really looked at the way scientists are perceived. And you see on this little graph that sort of warmth and competence, well, where we have over on the left-hand side, we have garbage collectors and prostitutes and truck drivers. These are warm people. Now, they're not considered to be especially competent at all levels, but they're warm. You would want to talk to them, maybe engage with them at some level. And then you have people that are both warm and competent, teachers, nurses, farmers. These are the people that you really maybe might want to be one day. And then you have people here who are very competent, but not so warm and fuzzy. And scientists are among this group. As Susan says, they don't really think about the human qualities of scientists. And the NSF data tells us that most people, when you ask, do you personally know a scientist? Most people will say no. And those who do say yes, when you unpack that data, what they really mean is that perhaps they know a physician. They don't really know a scientist. And so it's very hard to think about a scientist as a person if you don't really know a scientist. I know that's not true of the audience in this room, but we're speaking more generally. So we as scientists, we have heart, but we don't have heart. And that's what you really want, is for people to think of science people as having actual sparkly pink hearts, because scientists do. We all know that. So what we did at the National Academies was to think about how do we take Abraham Lincoln's heart and bring that to life? Because it is possible. There is another side to Abraham Lincoln. And it is my job at the Academies to think about the ways that we color outside the lines. I am required in the Office of the Chief Communications Officer to color outside the lines. I am responsible for the portfolio of programs and activities that are called the creative engagement strategies. And so that's the work that I do. And so I always like to say to Marcia McNutt that I think that's her. That we are boldly going where we always go, but with a little swagger in our step. She has challenged me to find that hat because, and Marcia would wear it, I would like to be able to find and procure that for her. We do know, I think most of you probably are aware of the deficit model in communications, which simply says it's not about providing people with more information. It's not the deficit of information that is the problem. And so we have long since recognized that it's not just about providing people with more information from those journals or newspapers or whatever medium in which we choose to communicate. And so it's not about the information, it's about the inspiration. We have to start communicating to people through humor and heart. And it's the pink sparkly heart, not just the gritty human beating heart. It's both of those things. And so we have to think about using non-traditional messengers when we reach out to people, because people can't always recognize who a scientist is. And sure, he is an engineer, probably, not so much a scientist, but that's okay. It's hard for sometimes people to make that distinction. And we have to think about the ways in which science and culture actually intersect for people, because that's what's meaningful for somebody. How does it matter to me? Why do I care about this? And it's usually at a cultural level that it matters to somebody. And it's not because it's good for them. You know, I would submit to you that your grandmother would have served you a Brussels sprout that looked like that because it was good for you. And Brussels sprouts are still good for you. But it's not that you eat that because it's been told to you that you should. It's because you want it, because today it looks like that. We have discovered high temperature roasting and pomegranate seeds and olive oil, and now it is delicious. And so we ask for Brussels sprouts. We're not told it's good for you, you must eat it. We want it. And so, I mean, celeriac is getting in on the deal. And I would say, celeriac, get out of the way, because science comes first. And if you can make your science delicious, then people will ask for it, and they won't have to be told that they must have it. And so the Science and Entertainment Exchange is a program of the National Academy of Sciences that was created, actually, yesterday was our birthday. It is our 11th birthday. We were launched on November 19th in 2008 to be able to create a connection between the entertainment industry in Hollywood and the science and engineering community. And there's that moment where I suppose people thought, so we're just going to ride in on our white horse of the National Academy of Sciences and save Hollywood. We tried really hard not to make it that, and I think that's why we're still around 11 years from now. The mandate, of course, was to communicate more broadly with diverse audiences through the medium of film and television, and to work with the entertainment industry to bring them the opportunity to include more, and one hopes, better science in film and television. Now, of course, because we are the Academies, we did turn to the literature base to determine how effective this might be and what really might underpin this particular program. So this is going back, for those of you who are old enough, I remember this television show. There were people that would actually write to, this is Dr. Marcus Welby, there were people that would write to Dr. Welby and ask him for advice on their personal health. Now, at some level, they must have realized that this man was an actor and not an actual doctor. And yet they felt so much more comfortable asking him for medical advice rather than their own practitioner, because they knew him. He was in their living room every single week. They knew his golf score. They knew what he had for dinner. How much time did they actually spend with their own practitioner? So they would ask him uncomfortable questions rather than their own practitioner. And this was documented in the literature, how many letters he would receive asking for personal health advice. We also looked at the way in which the CDC had been trying to implement the designated driver, the safe driver program, so that people were not driving under the influence of alcohol. It was only when they turned to Hollywood and through these instrumental television programs that people got to see actually someone saying at the bar at Cheers, I'm not going to drink, I'm going to be the designated driver. And then they saw the consequences of that on LA Law when somebody would get in trouble. And then they would see Dr. Huxtable, who's maybe not America's favorite dad anymore, but at the time giving sage advice to his children. And it was through this medium that this finally took hold in culture for people to understand the value, and the designated driver became something that everyone just understood, accepted, and practiced. We also saw that this is the work of the Kaiser Family Foundation, where they worked with specific television shows, in this case it's Grey's Anatomy, to be able to communicate something about the transmission of the AIDS virus. And this was very hard for people to understand, that if you were infected with the HIV virus and you became pregnant, but you were following a very careful drug regimen, that you did have a very high probability of delivering a healthy baby. So it was only when they implanted this, in the words of another fake doctor, that this was communicated effectively to the American public. And the Kaiser Family Foundation did go out. They actually did some testing before the television show aired. Then they tested right after the show aired, and then 6 weeks later. And so these statistics that 15% of the people got the information right before the show aired, 61% immediately after the television show aired, and the retention rate, you can see that there's some drop, but not an awful lot. I mean, that's still a pretty good retention rate, compliments of a popular television program. Similarly, we saw something about the way in which cervical cancer can be prevented through a vaccine, and this was on ER. And so you see the same kind of statistics, that not many people understood this before the show aired. There's a much greater understanding after the show aired, and then a bit of a drop off 6 to 8 weeks later. And so these kinds of messages that go into popular television programs are very powerful. Just by holding up somebody's driver's license saying, well, next time I get my driver's license renewed, I can become an organ donor. All of a sudden, we saw a huge uptake in people saying, I will donate my organs when I get my driver's license renewed. There is also literature to suggest that on the television show 24, that people were able to normalize the notion of an African-American president by watching this popular television show, so that it was less of a bridge for people to cross in real life once this became an actual voting proposition. And so the Academy decided, well, there's a scientific term for this: monkey see, monkey do. And of course, we also say that if you can't see it, you can't be it. You can't understand it, you cannot relate to it. And that's what these film and television programs do for us. Now, I'm not going to tell you that this was easy for us. This terrified the Academy. This did not feel comfortable. If you know anything about us, you know that we are a very conservative kind of place. But Ralph Cicerone, I always like to say that there was DC Dr. Cicerone, and then there was Hollywood Ralph. And Hollywood Ralph understood this. And so he said, let's be brave. Let's just go for it. And we did. And I think that I was very proud of him and very, very grateful for the support that he showed for this program. So you can think of the program as 1-800-I-NEED-A-SCIENTIST. That is too many digits. You cannot actually dial it. So there is a number, 844-NEED-SCI. Chances are you probably don't need a toll-free number, because you probably know plenty of SCIs. But if you are in the film or television industry and you need a connection to a scientist, this is what we offer the Hollywood community. These were the first 2 consults that we did. I thought that I was going to get in big trouble, because at the end of Watchmen, there was actually the Science Entertainment Exchange logo at the end of it. And Ralph had said, now we have to do this on the DL. I don't think that's probably not his exact words. I don't think he would have said that. But he said, let's not make it like really public. And we did get some credit at the end of that movie. Since then, we have done 2,700 consults on film and television. We have a very small but mighty team in Los Angeles. Rick Lubbard is our program director, and Sachi Gerben is his second chair. About 40% of my time is devoted to this. People often ask about our funding. Hollywood pays nothing for this. If we ask them to pay for this service, they would just say, yeah, I think I'll Google it. And if I get it wrong, oh well. So they don't pay anything for it. We do have funders, though, who make this service available to the Hollywood community for free. And so we are very grateful to all of our funders for making this possible. I'm just going to quickly flip through some so that you get a chance to see some of the work that we've been doing. But I just want to say that, you know, there is this notion that Hollywood doesn't care about getting it right. And I would say that that is not true. Our experience over the last 10 years has been that they care very much, that they want to get it right, but there is a whole chain through which a creative project will go. A writer may get it right, and then a director or a studio executive or somebody will change it. Yes, we've consulted on every episode of the rebooted Magic School Bus. And so when you see something that's wrong and you don't always celebrate that science, it isn't because we didn't consult on it. It's because sometimes it isn't always perfect. A National Academy of Sciences member consulted on this, and while the science wasn't always perfect in this, he was quoted above the fold in major national newspapers about earthquake science and earthquake safety because of the marketing run-up from the studio on this film. So it isn't always about what happens in the movie. I mean, I don't think that Tom Jordan would have said that The Rock is going to come and personally save all of us from an earthquake disaster, but he was able to talk about earthquake preparedness in a number of important ways because of this film. And you can see that some of these things don't look super sciencey, but there's science that ends up in these things in surprising ways. So we're always, and these are really, very popular things. We do documentary consulting as well, so it's not just on the fictional side of the house. And so it's just that for the most part, what they ask us there is more for talent scouting. And it's interesting with documentaries, sometimes we'll get calls, can you recommend a scientist from the Midwest that feels corn-fed? I'm not really sure what that usually... So we don't do that. We usually say, no, we don't know. We can recommend a really wonderful scientist that could help you because of their expertise, but we don't do that kind of casting, is sometimes how they ask us. We oftentimes cannot talk about the individual projects on which we're working because we're held by the studios through non-disclosure agreements. It's a very, very competitive kind of place. So the things that I'm showing you on those slides are older things. The newer things on which we're working, we usually can't talk about. I also would point out that this is as much about a cultural exchange as anything else. The 1-800-I-NEED-A-SCIENTIST is very reactive. We have to wait to be called and somebody has to ask a question. What we quickly realized is that we had to pivot to be able to say, well, nobody's asking us about fecal transplants. Well, they've never heard of that. Nobody's asking us about the science that we think is important. And sometimes people don't know what science is. They oftentimes, sadly, discount social science, which we do not. We have an entire 11th floor devoted to social science. And so we oftentimes then do a variety of events that put scientists in front of them that they would never think to ask about. And sometimes the events are their salons. Hollywood living rooms are much better than my living room. So you have 80 or 90 people in a Hollywood living room, and they're very companionable. Everyone's drinking wine, having dinner. And then they realize scientists are actually fun and interesting. And now all of a sudden, this very much changes the depiction of character. We're also very purposeful about picking. Oftentimes, we have only women or only women and people of color. And because this is how we shift the depiction of character. This is the only way we can do this. We do panel discussions, but we do them in places like the Directors Guild of America. We do a lot of tours to interesting places, whether it's the NASCAR racetrack or whether it's we have our board on military studies has gotten us into a lot of military facilities. So there are really interesting propositions and places we can take them. We've taken them behind the scenes at the Smithsonian. Although I will say that Joss Whedon asked me one time, can you get me someplace really sciencey in Washington, like, I don't know, the Lincoln bedroom? And I said, well, I think I could come up with something better than that, which we did, and I'm not sure he understood what sciencey really meant. And so we do, who doesn't want to do science in bars? So we do some science in speakeasies and science in bars. And then we do retreats. We always call these our highest form of engagement. And this is where we take usually 12 scientists and engineers and an equivalent number of pick your cohort, writers or directors or producers, and take them away for a weekend. And they do story ideation, they do workshops, but they're also just spending a lot of quality time together where they get to know each other. And these groups become extremely cohesive. We had a retreat group that started an email thread the other day. This was a group from 3 years ago. And Tim Miller, who directed the first Deadpool and is now just finished directing the new Terminator movie, they were all, it was like they just couldn't get enough of each other. This becomes a very cohesive group very quickly that interact with one another on a regular basis. And so a lot of people will say, so this is all about making sure that it's accurate. And we always say we don't use the A word. We almost never say anything about accuracy in film and television. That may be our ultimate goal. But if that is the proposition we take to Hollywood, if we become the accuracy police, we would never have survived. There had been others who had tried before us to create this relationship with Hollywood. And I always felt like that was the wrong value proposition to them. It's not what they can do for us, it's what we can do for them. And while that may not be the way we actually always think about it, that's certainly the way we have to present this program, about how we can be helpful to them. When you think about CSI, we had certainly seen criminal procedurals long before that. We had certainly seen some element of forensic science in television long before that. But the secret sauce for that program was to elevate the science in a new way. It wasn't always accurate, but by God, it was inspirational and it was super cool. And it is what created that CSI effect so that young people all over the place wanted to be that person. And so I think that sometimes giving up a little bit of accuracy to get more about the I words, like inspiration, and to get the power of introduction on your side, and to really rely on the imagery that we're hoping that will change the face of science for most people out there. Because what we're hoping for is that we'd seen the way children had been drawing scientists in the past. And this was from the 1980s, where children were asked to draw scientists. Now, this is more recent, where they were asked to draw scientists. So you can see over time that this is changing. And a lot of what is helping are these media images to which children are exposed. I mean, there are a lot of factors. But you can even see that a movie like Brave or the Hunger Games, I'm not saying that we always want to make sure that young women are archers, but on the other hand, all it took was 2 movies for young women to want to be archers. And so this is a pretty obscure sport. And all of a sudden, this is what makes them want to do it. But we've also seen movies like Hidden Figures. Now, believe me, the studio did not expect this movie to be such a hit. They really were surprised when this was a hit. And they also saw this mostly as a social justice movie. They did not understand that this was a STEM movie. And so for the science community, they were overwhelmed by requests to screen this as a science inspiration movie. And they leaned into it as soon as they realized what they had. But this is the kind of thing that people are very inspired by. And then, of course, we have Wakanda Forever. I mean, thank you. And I will say we were instrumental on the consulting for this film. Joe Cole, who wrote this movie, went to our very first retreat, had never written a science movie before. And if you see this movie, wait till the very end where they say, the king of Wakanda is saying to her, so he says, sister, why am I here? Well, sister, you will be starting the science and education exchange. That's our Easter egg. And so that's what we believe, how this actually makes a difference and changes the way in which heart is expressed through science. So I think I have time for questions. I've been timing myself, so I am now officially done. It's 0.